Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So, gentlemen, why don't you start by telling me a little bit about the technology you currently have on the market and where that technology really excels, or Mr. McGann here in the middle, maybe the technology you recently sold.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, Kevin McGann, President and CEO of Excellis. So we're in the spinal implant business, is the genesis of Excellis. We have been in business for about 6 years. We're based down in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. We have some very unique technology for biplanar expandable lumbar implants. Back in July of 2021, we acquired Fusion Robotics, the assets of Fusion Robotics, which was Dr. Kevin Foley and Brad Clayton, a long-term Medtronic engineer involved with O-arm, Stealth, and Mazor. And that was absolutely fabulous technology that we acquired. We looked at it as our ability to supplement our implant line with that enabling technology and compete directly with Mazor and with the Globus robot that are currently on the market. The uniqueness of the REMI system, we rebranded it, it's the REMI Robotic and Navigation System, was that number one, the footprint was incredibly small. You literally could take this robot, package it back up, and put it into a Pelican case the size of a carry-on luggage to the airplane. So it offered that great feature of number one, very small footprint, easy setup, easy takedown, and the one big unique feature about it as well is that the camera was in field, and so it was attached right there. It was on the bed and allowed you to, number one, not have the problems that the other robots have as far as obstruction of field of view, and also really enhance the navigation capability of the technology. Again, that was July of 21. We spent the time, it was indicated with O-arm as far as the initial imaging, and we spent the time and got 510K approval for not only O-arm, but Zeem, the Stryker Aero, and GE, the new GE 2D, 3D system platform that they have out. So that allows us to expand the market. Simultaneously, we spent the time and got the 510K approval for 2D, so the GE 9900 C-arm that is very, very prevalent in every hospital in the US, as well as in the ASCs. And that was really going to be our play, was compete in the hospital, but in the ASC market with fluoro. And again, fit very well with our minimally invasive endoscopic implants that we had. All that being said, we wound up just recently selling the technology. The deal closed April 19th of 2023. We sold it to a larger competitor in our space, and really was done for really financial reasons. We were going to go public after the acquisition of Fusion Robotics. We were going to go public in the spring of 22 with all of the changes in the market, rising interest rates, the lack of capital, of equity investment opportunities. We actually chose not to do it. But taking on this as a small company, taking on this enabling technology, candidly was a little bit too big for us. And so the technology now resides in Alphatec, and they have some great applications for it. So, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the ways that this was very unique, but that was the technology that we had for about 18 months, and we did just sell it off.
And then Kevin Hykes is here to my immediate left. Kevin, how about you? Tell us about your technology.
So thank you. I appreciate the chance to be here today. So I'm the president and CEO of Augmetics, which is a 10-year-old venture-backed medical device company founded in Israel, but now based here in the United States in Chicago. So it wasn't a very long commute for me, thankfully. We have treated 4,000 patients with the first FDA-approved augmented reality surgical navigation platform for any application. The device is currently being used in roughly 60 US centers, about 100 physicians, and we just, I believe, implanted our 20,000th pedicle screw. So we've learned a lot in the last 3 years about navigation in general and how to bring enabling technology to bear on not a terribly novel concept. Navigation's been around 26 years, but it has not been widely adopted. So we believe our system, by allowing a physician to remain focused on the surgical field, by eliminating the line of sight disruptions that Kevin mentioned, by having a head-mounted camera, by facilitating work with any and every implant system in the market, and by importantly projecting a three-dimensional rendering of the spine with sub-millimeter accuracy on the patient's body, which allows a physician to minimize or perform minimally invasive surgery, or if nothing else, minimize the invasiveness of their procedure. All of that while delivering the benefits of navigation, which include improved accuracy and reduced radiation exposure.
Great. And Edward, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate the opportunity. Orthogrid System is a company we started about 8 years ago. We've specialized in the space of fluoroscopic navigation for orthopedic surgery. We really came from the anterior hip market, where saw a change from computer-assisted surgery the traditional way with cameras and pins, and the introduction of fluoroscopy, something that is standard of care in a lot of orthopedic procedures. And we looked at the differences between the CAS system and the fluoroscopy side, and we saw an opportunity to disrupt on top of a standard of care. We felt we could provide and take the imaging, the data inside the images are being produced, and get a machine to make sense of that data. So if you're producing an image as a surgeon, you're not trying to do a selfie with it. You're literally having something in it that matters to you. You're trying to determine quality assurance. Is this the right anatomy? Is this the right step of surgery? That data is important. So we just created algorithms that make sense of these images, and then package them and train them on the different steps of the surgery, so that when you use our product in surgery, it's pretty much pre-trained. It recognizes the information. It automatically spits out things such as quality assurance things. This is the right image, it's not the right image, and give you the numbers. So surgeons are able to just focus on the procedure and the reproducibility they're trying to get out of the surgical act, instead of waiting on a system to or an operator to actually do things for them. And it's immediate. It's live and real time. So it's very interesting to deploy this type of technologies in ORs where fluoroscopy is just used a lot. And that means the orthopedic space has a lot of opportunity for expansion, since fluoro is used in a very large number of cases.
Great, thank you. Kevin, you alluded to navigation is not new in orthopedics. However, we've seen adoption stagnate over recent years. Could you venture a guess as to why that stagnation is, and what needs to happen to really cross that gap into mass market adoption for these technologies?
Sure, and I should warn you, it'll be a little bit self-serving and biased, but so navigation was introduced in 1996 by Medtronic. The Stealth system is the 80% market share leader today, and after 26 years, it has not breached 20% adoption in the market. You compare that to robotics. Da Vinci, the robot for prostatectomy, is now at 85% procedural penetration after a little over 10 years. So there's something wrong with the cost-benefit trade-off to navigation. Navigation improves accuracy by 8 points, from roughly 90 or 91% accuracy to 98 plus. It reduces radiation 2 to 3 times versus a typical freehand procedure, and it's not being adopted. And so we believe that cost-benefit equation needs to be adjusted. There are clearly benefits, but today's systems require a physician to look away from the patient while operating on their spinal column, to look across the room at 2-dimensional screens and try to mentally form a 3-dimensional model of the patient's spine as they're working. In addition, every time someone reaches in or out of the field or they lean forward with today's systems, the navigation experience stops because the line of sight has been disrupted. So what we've developed effectively is the Medtronic Stealth Station, first-in-class navigation system that's worn on the head, and that costs 1/4 of the cost of a typical legacy navigation system today. So we think we're addressing workflow, physician experience, cost certainly, and as well a system that works with each and every system on the market. So you get away from some of the sort of proprietary systems that only work with a certain tool system or a certain implant.
Great. And Mr. McGann, what are your thoughts on maybe why that adoption stalled and what needs to happen to push it forward?
Yeah, so speaking specifically to the robotic portion of it, number one is just the cost. They're well over $1 million, big capital expense for the hospitals. The footprint is very large. And so generally for the spine service, they now have a robotic spine room, and that room is dedicated towards, the robot. you can only have one user at a time. And so again, you're limiting the number of procedures that could actually be done on that robot. When you look at the learning curve as well and the length of time initially for procedures, it's a big hindrance from the adoption perspective as well as from the cost efficiency perspective, particularly for the hospitals. So when you look at those barriers and then the training component, the training obviously is the burden of the manufacturers, but to train the staff on the use of the robot, the setup, the takedown time, it really becomes highly inefficient in a hospital setting, and there's really no opportunity to sell these into an ASC, which a lot of degenerative spinal fusion procedures are moving into that ASC space, and so there's really not that opportunity to replicate the market. And again, the advantage that we saw with the REMI technology, as I mentioned earlier, the incredibly small footprint, the mobility. We had a couple of surgeons that had ownership interest in a couple ASCs, and we're going to be taking that from ASC to ASC to be able to use it. And so I do think that as the technology continues to advance, you're going to start to see smaller footprint robots and the cost effectiveness. When we had REMI, it was 1/3 the price of the traditional Globus robot or the Medtronic robot.
And Edward?
Yeah, I think for me, when we look at that, there's really three things. There's the pace of innovation, first of all, form and function, and then the ability to integrate. And going back to the integration of technology when you mentioned 1996, I think that's interesting because we're seeing the same thing. In the same amount of time that these robots and computer-assisted surgery systems, not to knock them off, I think they work and have a very strong place in the market. But if you compare it to like fluoroscopy at equal starting point, anterior hip, for example, if you take that opportunity of a new procedure and if you look at that time frame, about 15 years, you have about a 50% market share of that anterior hip that's taken over. And in that time frame, if the traditional systems are expensive, have pins and all those different things, require CT scan, they just haven't penetrated that market, whereas fluoroscopy was adopted, and now 95% of those surgeries are done with this type of modality. So you have to consider what is a fluoroscopy, what is a navigation system, first of all, and then what are the technology and innovations. All the innovations that we see come from technology, expertise, from the past, really, that are being integrated. So it takes time to develop these things. And then the form and function matters. As you build these things, parallel industries have to kind of move at the same pace so that they actually meet at a point where things start working together, form and function. And if it's not in balance, at some point, you have the early adopters are willing to compromise, but for mass adoption, you need to have these things to come, and work together. And if you're able to solve the right problems, not create new ones, you should see a lot of adoption rate going a lot faster. We're seeing that with the AI. We've been in business for 8 years, different products, but since we launched our AI platform that comes pre-trained and is automated and really demands very little of the surgical staff, you're seeing an adoption rate that we have not experienced before. And so I think you need to have these moments of technology to move and expand so that you start getting adoption. It needs to meet the problems, clinical and financial as well.
And Edward, maybe staying with you, we talked about the problems affecting adoption, so looking at from the customer's point of view. But how about if we look internally? What are the burdens, for lack of a better word, to developing and fielding these technologies?
Yeah, I think first of all, at least for us, when we needed to, start creating this solutions, people, the expertise. Do we have the right people? Do we know whether those people know what they're talking about? Because some of these technologies are new, so you don't really know what the expertise level needs to be. And then the cost of the folks. There is a lot of velocity, I almost want to say, in a market right now with employees. So retention is important of these experts. The data as well, since we're in a data-powered system, data access is tricky. You need to have enough data, the right data, and you need to know ahead of time what problems you're trying to solve so you have the right data. Because everything we do is pre-trained. So once you're in the operating room, we want to make sure it's working and has worked properly. And I would say lastly, so yeah, people access, and then, oh yes, supply chain. Lead times. So since we're dependent on computing power, the lead times specifically lately, hopefully Taiwan doesn't get invaded by China, otherwise we're going back to 1995 real fast. But all of us on any domain, hopefully lead times, on computing power is something you have to manage alongside your financial position for cash management. So those are the three things I think we look at pretty closely.
What are your thoughts, Mr. Hikes?
So I'd say sort of three main focal points, none of them probably surprising. In our space, we have a building with 55 engineers in northern Israel who have been working for 10 years to develop a proprietary head-mounted navigation system. We learned early on that borrowing HoloLens or Magic Leap or Oculus, those are not medical devices. They're not optimized for navigating surgeries. They can't deliver the necessary performance. So I wasn't at the company at the time, but they bit the bullet and began a very expensive 9-year process to develop what we think is a best-in-class head-mounted wearable navigation system optimized for surgery. So that's number one. Number two is deploying that technology into the U.S. market, into any market, but certainly the U.S. market requires a highly trained, motivated, well-paid clinical and capital selling team. So there's about 70 people working on that project, and we learned the hard way, you cannot, with spine surgeons perhaps more than any other surgical specialty, they require and demand someone in the OR around them. It's an ego thing. Our technology is not hard to use. It could certainly run itself, but they told us, you need someone in this room. And when we tried to go through distributors, they told us, we need someone who cares about your tech more than the distributor did. We then tried to do it with relatively junior, fresh biomedical engineering grads, and they told us, we want a qualified, experienced spinal sales rep, clinically proficient, standing next to us, not a very capable but very junior technical expert. So again, that costs a ton of money. So the third problem is money. Right? So our company has raised $66 million to date. We're going to announce another significant fundraising in the next 10 days. So it's no easy task to bring one of these enabling technologies to market for a whole number of reasons. But in this market especially, capital is scarce. And so that's been a real challenge and thankfully one we've solved.
Sure. Mr. McGann.
Yeah, so it's interesting listening to Kevin as we're both in the spinal space, different technologies, but number one, the engineering, as Kevin said, as a spinal implant company, our need to bring on software engineers was quite an expense. Recruiting those folks as well, where do they mostly are? In Southeast Florida, was that the best place to get them? We opened an office in Boulder, Colorado. We had access to a lot of these software engineers where a lot of these companies are already hubbed. So that gave us the opportunity, but again, cost to open up office space out there in Boulder, Colorado. The sales channel is completely different as well. And so now you have to go out and hire competent capital equipment sales folks, even though, as I said, we're at a $350,000 price point, which is kind of right at that cusp, but we still needed people that understood that process and not just the traditional spinal rep that knows spinal anatomy and is there for a surgeon to help facilitate the procedure. So that was another big cost. The supply chain component of it, additional vendors on the approved list, that you go through that process, the quality team, the regulatory teams. So again, as I mentioned kind of in the opening remarks, the lesson learned from our chair was, and again, when capital markets got as tight as they did, it was the wrong time to try to get that big. And we took on something that, fortunately it's a tremendous asset, gave us good value back in return to help us continue to grow and focus on our core competency. But it was a major burden for us as an organization.
Sure. And then as orthopedics rapidly modernizes, there's a sentiment out there that data is now currency in orthopedics. What are some of the things, Edward, that we need to be thinking about as the industry moves away from solely metal and plastic to now more of a digital ecosystem paradigm.
You guys hear me? Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. I was still listening to your question. Yeah, so I mean, from a data standpoint, our systems are fed with data. And what's interesting is the problem you're trying to solve, you're solving today is really based on old data. It's data that was yesterday's data that you applied to solving a problem today. Whereas your systems may be generating new data, right? And the question is that new data useful to treating new or applied to new problems? And then the question becomes, have we identified the new problems? And are we generating the right data for these problems? So data generation is one thing. You also need to collect it and have all these issues. So really we're working on old data applied for current problems, and we still need to figure out what the new problems are. What's very interesting is that you can use it for internal purposes as well. So in our product development team, they're using some of the data generated and allowing us to actually accelerate the production of algorithms and or solutions. And R&D team took 5 years to break through with some really meaningful algorithms. Now what we're finding is that they're producing more solutions that we can actually deploy in the market. And that's very interesting from our point of view into the acceleration and the power that we can get. I would say one more thing is the data, other than just data, but technology is meant to be integrated. So we're seeing that AR is integrating AI, for example, right? It's the same thing with our solution. There's just different problems and different technology to solve these problems. So it makes sense that AI, for example, will seek the help of AR or will seek the help of robotics to solve different type of problems in the operating room. So all these technologies at some point will leverage each other, and that's part of the data generation usage, I think.
Kevin McGann, how are you thinking about the data?
Yeah, so I do want to echo your last comments relative to that integration of the different technologies out there, and that data capability is incredibly important. I do think that is a great opportunity moving forward. For spine and robotics, the data that's collected is enormous. Bone density, tissue tension, trajectory, the pre-operative planning is so key. The competitive robots outside of REMI, you had the ability to do pre-operative planning. So you're planning your pedicle screw size, your implant size, your trajectory, and then measuring that against the actual outcomes and having that data. So again, as you start to move into a predictive analytics type of situation, this patient presents themselves with XYZ, and this is the best implant to be using, the best size pedicle screw to be using. So there's so much data to be capturing from that perspective. And I think a couple other things, number one, in spine, getting really to objective data points. What makes sense? There's a lot of implants out there. There's the different approaches. You can go lateral, you can go A-lift, you can go posterior, you can go D-lift. There's so many different ways to approach the spinal space. And so when you start to collect and gather that data, analyze that data for this specific patient with these indications, what is the best solution for that is absolutely key. And then, at the end of the day, looking at customized instrumentation with precise placement. Robots right now in spine are really just used for trajectory guide for pedicle screw placement. When you start to look at the ability to dilate every probe, every dilator probe past the nerve roots, what does that mean? And then when you start to navigate specifically to placement and trajectory of that implant, there's just a tremendous opportunity moving forward there as well.
Thank you. Mr. Hikes?
Yeah, so maybe I'd offer, I agree with both of your comments. I would echo those. Slightly different real-time issue we're dealing with, kind of as it speaks to data as currency. So we integrate AI-based features into our navigation platform. And you need to feed these convolutional neural networks data sets. And the FDA, in this new sort of AI frontier, is trying to figure out what their requirements should be for training a neural network that then informs a surgeon. And that's a moving target. And they're still literally month to month figuring out, well, you need a certain number of scans from each type of machine. You need a certain number of scans of each sort of scanning modality. You need a certain number of scans from Europeans and Americans and Hispanics and Caucasians. And It's a giant moving target. And the problem is you cannot get your hands on this data. It doesn't exist in any one place. So if any of you are looking for a business opportunity, I'm not kidding, somebody who could consolidate scans in a de-identified sort of truthed method, we would pay. We were on the phone this morning. We've been trying for 9 months to get 60 scans from a GE scanner of a representative population, and it's almost impossible. And there's 3 at WashU, and there's 20 at Stanford, and there's 10 at the Brigham, and those institutions move so slowly, it is daunting to just try to pull in what you need to get past the FDA. And they will change that requirement again, and they'll probably ask us for 200, and then you're stuck again trying to scrabble around and pull that data together. So different side of the problem, but absolutely crucial to developing AI and getting it approved in this market.
That's a great point. Last question before we open it up to the audience, and more of a personal question. Kevin, what excites you most about the digital aspect of orthopedics now?
You know, at its simplest form, you know, our hope is to bring a 26-year-old proven benefit that's not being used to the benefit of the other 80% of patients getting spine surgery that could in fact benefit. And by using digital assets and AI and AR to make it almost a crime not to do surgery this way, that helps these patients, it helps the surgeons operate more effectively, it improve outcomes, it helps us start to manage and predict outcomes on the basis of the procedures that are done. So our hope is pretty simple. It's to really try to bring this into today's environment in a way that makes sense from a cost-benefit standpoint.
Great. Kevin?
Yeah, I think, you know, from a pre-operative planning perspective, being able to really identify, again, the specific indications and applications that you're going to be doing that, as everyone's probably familiar with the sports study in spine, gosh, I don't know how many years ago it was now, probably 15 to 20 years ago, the outcomes for fusion, you know, are still not as high as they need to be in many other parts of orthopedics. You know, that procedure is much more highly predictable and the outcomes are more consistent. And so when I look at that opportunity moving forward in the spinal world is to really be able to get to that more objective evidence and get the better patient outcomes.
Now, what excites you most?
Yeah, I mean, I have a huge passion for the intra-operative segment, and there's a lot of pre-operative efforts being done with technology being brought in, and there's going to be integration on our side. What we're finding is the more we start automating certain systems, the pre-trained component, like the auto registration, when you get in your operating room and things starts working without a human interacting with it, it's kind of magical. And so staying in the concept of magical environment, even like in this manufacturing conference, it's interesting to think of where else can you apply these tools and digital tools, right? So take an instrument, for example. Can you make it disappear because suddenly it's in a space where you really don't want to see it? We've done that on a small little project. It's fascinating that you have an instrumentation in a field of view on an image and suddenly you make it disappear. You can see the bone and you can actually do a step that you couldn't do before with that instrument. Or you can start using maybe 3D additive type technologies and creating shapes that are allowing, you know, smart systems to recognize them to bring them alive, I guess, in your field of view. And those are things that are super interesting to me because I find that orthopedic surgery specifically hasn't really changed a lot. Go to the trauma space, you know, they're still doing the same thing. I was selling trauma 25 years ago. My gosh, they're still doing exactly the same thing they were doing 25 years ago. So being able to take these bricks of technologies and rethinking the way instrumentations are designed, potentially sold, and also maybe how they help sell implants differently is one area that's interesting. The other piece is taking these blocks of technologies that we create, say, for one application, like a hip, for example, and then move them over to different areas of orthopedics. Remember, fluoroscopy is used a lot. So what we're interested in doing is, if I develop an algorithm for a hip implant or something like this, can I use it in a hip fracture? Can I use it in a pelvic case? Can I easily move them over to other areas of orthopedics so we can bring the benefits to a broader segment of the surgical space in that market? And I think that helps a lot with hospital conversations. We got to see those hospitals as as our partners. We try to sell them value, and if they're going to give us some money, we got to make sure we improve the clinical performance and we meet the value equation of clinical over cost. And that's a big component of integrating that into your design process really early on, so that when you put something out, you are meeting not only the surgeon's performance and efficiency gain, but also the cost containment component. So you have good, strong surgical hospital partnerships as well.
Thank you. All right, so I'd like to open it up to the floor for questions. Who has a question for us? You guys covered it exceptionally well, it seems.
Yeah, this morning we covered some issues with supply chain. We didn't talk about any of that this afternoon, so I'm just curious from the, the robot standpoint, any issues there, any, thing that you're coming against currently?
When we had the REMI technology, it was actually components that were put together to make the robot. The imaging component came from Toronto. The actual robotic portion came from Germany. And so they, were assembling all of that, and then we were basically combining that technology, putting it into a cart, computer monitors, et cetera. So during our tenure with REMI, mid-21 through just this past April, we didn't have much challenges in that marketplace. There was some minimum requirements that already had been purchased, so there was some supply already on hand as well.
We had one component that went from $5 to $800 for 6 months, but otherwise, thankfully, no disruptions. We were able to hoard enough in advance and to kind of fight our way through. So
Was that a surgical mask?
yeah, PPE.
Just a basic question. Wondering if, you're talking about adoption, trying to grow the numbers of interest that there is in some of these systems. Do you find that that's a generational thing? Do you find that as older surgeons are sort of moving on and they're set in their ways, you're getting younger surgeons maybe who grew up as kids, playing Nintendo, or whatever, that they're more amenable to using these technologies where they're not doing necessarily direct visualization, or they're getting the augmented reality or whatever? Is that a generational thing? Do you think that fact alone will help to grow the adoption?
That's a great question. And I think, interestingly, we have, we've examined who's using our system. And today, if you look at the, all the physicians that used our system last quarter, 60% of them were navigating likely with Medtronic and switched to us. The other 40% were not navigating at all, and were in hospitals that had navigation and imaging, could have done so, but had chosen not to until we arrived. And so, interestingly, if you slice that across the sort of various orthogonal cuts, it is being used almost equally by early stage, mid stage, and late stage surgeons. So we don't see that. What we do see is an almost dependence on the technology from the younger fellows who almost cannot navigate, who cannot do a surgery without navigation. So it's helping us in a way that was different than we thought. They pick it up quickly. They're facile with technology. But it's not so much a learning curve thing as that they were trained to be dependent on it. So we're happy to help them with their next home, in effect.
Yeah, we actually see the same thing with surgeons coming out, and the need for navigation is absolutely critical to them. They want that for their spinal procedures, and will not join up, practice after their training unless that navigation is available, navigation specifically at the hospital. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, on our side, we're seeing something a little bit different, I think. I mean, sure, there's definitely an age and an interest, but when we look at the adoption, we were afraid that high volume physicians, for example, didn't need it. And I think high volume physicians sometimes have been around for a while, so they're using technology, or they've tried it, and they have their own opinion of the value that they're gaining out of it. And that's been the biggest challenge, is to get into those ORs. Once we're in those ORs, if they realize that they all need something, and gaining that business is the one that matters to us the most, because that's the one that's the most critical sometimes. And that's independent of age. I don't know if we have an age piece. Actually, the older ones, if they've done a ton of volume, they're very efficient, and they want something that helps them move forward and not horizontal, if that makes sense. So meeting that demand is important. But I want to touch on another category for adoption, and I think it's the distribution channels, the sales reps and the sales models that you use. Technology sales is slightly a little bit different. Like, if you're trying to get some folks that have a long tenure in a space, maybe selling implants or other things like that, they may not be the right guys that are looking at the value proposition and understanding the conversation, and also being willing to change the sales process. We're finding that we're doing a ton more sales call on a 15-minute Zoom. I have one literally at 4:15 right now. It'll take me 10 minutes to do the sales call. That's completely different than the other systems that you may have to do a lot of training on, right? And I think that changes the adoption as well. We don't do evaluations, for example. We go straight to an install. And those are very different business model changes that helps the adoption rate, I think, in a process. So surgeon, but also who's selling it to them.
I'll go back to a supply chain question again. When you think of computers and technology and the product life cycle for those products, when you're designing your products that rely on that technology, how do you deal with the obsolescence of that as your products age? The cost to maintain existing, old technology tends to go up, or it drives you to make changes in your designs?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it affects them, but it affects me a lot. We launched a product in May last year. 6 weeks later, we had a new update because we figured out we could do more, and why not? And then in January, we had another one, and we're going to have another one this fall. So updating is definitely a concern. And then the obsolescence as well. I think it's actually an opportunity to have this conversation with hospitals. We turned it into an opportunity because obsolescence is one of the concerns that they have. I just bought that today. 18 months from now, I'm not going to have to buy something else. So we crafted our business model to integrate these constant changes and improvement in performance into the model. But it is something we wish we could do a little bit better. I think it's going to catch us, and I've already started slowing down those updates. But our products are getting a little bit of maturity as well. But yeah, it is something to be managed for sure. And yeah, it's manageable though.
Yeah, so I would sort of the other side of that coin. We have that same issue and are always trying to stay ahead of the next rev of each of our key components. But we're dealing with it from a feature standpoint. We're about to launch our next generation hardware platform, which we will iterate on a software basis for years to come. But we're trying to sort of future-proof it and understand what technology should we build into it today, even if we're not quite sure yet how we'd use it, to allow us to move with the market and not have to do radical surgery to our hardware platform. So, incorporating endoscopic video, which is coming up more and more, incorporating MRI images, video in and out, and voice command, and lots of things we don't quite yet know we would use, but we want to put the right technology platform in place now so that we can if we need to. It's a little bit different flavor, but the same sort of staying ahead of things.
Yep. Anybody else?
It means one thing: we're not done iterating at the end of the day, and I think that's the beauty of the excitement. That was the original question, and there's so much more that we be able to do, and it's very exciting times for technology for sure.
Okay. All right, if there are no more questions, I think we'll leave it there and release you all a few minutes early towards happy hour and give you a few minutes of your day back. So thank you all very much for attending, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.